They thought peace was the natural order, that strength came from diplomacy and survival from obedience. But in the forgotten corners of the galaxy, something was stirring. Something ancient, relentless, human. In this epic science fiction tale, you'll witness what happens when a forgotten race rises, not with fanfare, but with fire. Get ready for a story of survival, strategy, and raw defiance. Because when humanity finally enters the galactic stage, they don't ask for a seat. They take the whole damn table. The light was thin and dusty over the ruins of Zarnis, casting a rust-red haze over broken stone and half-buried relics. Wind crawled through the arches like something alive, whispering in a forgotten tongue. High above the dig site, 3 pale suns hung in the sky like the eyes of indifferent gods, glaring down at the Eltari excavation team who moved with reverent caution. Commander Virex stood at the edge of the trench, his 4-fingered hand shading his crested brow, watching as the Archaeo specialists unearthed what appeared to be a sealed containment pod, centuries old. It was humming, just faintly, like a heartbeat under glass. Power signature stable. No radiation leakage. It's still alive, one of the technicians murmured, wide-eyed. Virex's gaze narrowed. Artifacts this deep beneath the ash layer were never alive. The pod unlocked with a hiss, smooth, circular panels retracting to reveal not a weapon, not a creature, but something far more confounding, a box the size of a soldier's pack, matte black with a strange embossed sigil, an angular curve intersected by 3 jagged lines. The sigil was unfamiliar, aggressive, almost defiant. "Do not touch it," Virex ordered sharply. But it was too late. One of the junior researchers had already activated it. A light flickered on its surface. Then a projection. A figure appeared, humanoid, bipedal, eyes forward, soft flesh exposed to the elements, breathing heavily under a gray sky, holding a crude firearm. The image was grainy, distorted, but unmistakably real. The creature turned, fired at something off-screen, and within seconds a beast twice its size collapsed. There was no roar, no drama, just precision, efficiency, violence. The clip ended. Text appeared, Archive 45, Terran recon footage, year 2161. No one spoke. Even the wind had quieted. Virex stepped forward, his boots crunching over fossilized bone, and stared into the dark silence where the hologram had hovered. Terran, he repeated under his breath. Unknown species, unknown system, but clearly not extinct. He turned toward the others. Send it to the High Council, all of it. We've just dug up something that was meant to stay buried. By the next cycle, Virex stood before the silver-paneled grandeur of the Eltari High Council, the ancient domes humming with the murmurs of 1,000 minds linked across the galaxy. The oldest among them, a withered diplomat named Seren, tilted her eyeless head. You claim you've discovered a war race from an unregistered system, and they've never made contact with the Republic? Affirmative, Elder. No record of diplomatic signals, no space travel registry, no alliance treaties. It's as if they deliberately stayed hidden. Seren's voice was like wind passing through a tomb. Impossible. Any species with spaceflight seeks alliance, for trade, for peace, always. Virex stepped forward. What if they don't seek peace? A silence thicker than gravity settled over the chamber. Peace was the cornerstone of the galactic order. Even the Var, once feared apex predators of a blood-soaked world, had bent their knee to it. War was a concept wrapped in cautionary tales and cultural taboos. But the footage they had recovered was not a story. It was fact. The being in the footage, Virex continued, it was calm, methodical, not desperate. It didn't fight for survival. It executed a tactic. Another counselor, this one from the aquatic Skelv race, rippled their fins anxiously. But if they are not extinct, where have they been? Virex hesitated. He remembered the hollow stare in that creature's eyes, the lack of hesitation, the way it had moved, like a predator who'd forgotten fear long ago. Waiting, he finally said. I believe they've been watching. A murmur rose among the delegates, each voice a ripple of uncertainty, but Virex saw something else in their faces. Curiosity, and perhaps buried beneath centuries of self-assured peace, something he hadn't seen in his people in generations. Dread. Back in his quarters, he activated the clip again, looping it over and over. Frame by frame, he studied the movements, the posture, the sheer cold certainty in how the creature moved. Eltari soldiers were agile, yes, smart, but they had evolved on a world where predators had long been tamed. They built cities to hold back the wild. These humans, if that was their name, looked like they had built their civilization within the wild, through the wild. Their technology was not elegant, not refined. It was brutal, purposeful, and old, centuries old. So where were they now? That night, as the artificial moons rose over the Altari capital, Virex dreamed of a world covered in ice and fire, where storms screamed through endless oceans and beasts with too many teeth roamed lands cracked with war. And in the center of it all, a single species stood unbowed, burned, bleeding, but unbroken. He woke with one thought echoing like thunder behind his eyes. We are no longer alone. And for the first time in 1,000 years, the most intelligent species in the galaxy wondered if perhaps, just perhaps, they were no longer the strongest. The stars outside the Republic command station drifted slowly, like cold lanterns hung in an eternal void. From the observation deck, Virex watched them in silence, his reflection faint in the transparent alloy window. Behind him, conversations murmured, diplomats, advisors, officers from 10 different species, convening not out of ceremony, but uncertainty. Ever since the discovery of the Black Pod and its flickering footage, the Republic Council had moved from dismissal to obsession in record time. Virex had become a vessel, a mouthpiece for the unease they refused to admit aloud. But he felt it. In every gaze that lingered too long, every question spoken too softly, he felt the same question beneath them all. What if they're not like us? That question haunted him. The Republic had welcomed hundreds of species over centuries, some strong, some weak, some intellectually unmatched, others spiritually rich, but all bound by a common thread: fear of war, fear of extinction, fear that the chaos of their past would consume their future. The humans, if the recovered data was accurate, feared nothing but themselves. A chime interrupted his thoughts. "Commander Virex," said the aide's voice through his comm implant, "you are requested in briefing room 4. Urgently." He turned without reply. The corridor lights adjusted to his stride, casting elongated shadows over smooth floors, etched with the language of every known race. When he entered the briefing room, the Var was already there. Axakar, High Envoy of the Var Dominion, towered over the other delegates. His crimson-scaled form barely fit the chamber, his armor clinking softly as he adjusted his posture to the low gravity. His slitted eyes tracked Virex with unblinking precision. "So," Axakar said, voice like boulders grinding together, "they found another Deathworlder." Virex hesitated. "You saw the footage? I watched it 12 times. The Var gestured to the holoprojector. He didn't flinch when the beast charged, didn't hesitate to kill, but he didn't revel in it either. That's the difference. He wasn't hunting for sport, he was hunting for survival and mastery." Virex crossed his arms, unnerved by the admiration in the Var's tone. "You sound impressed." "I am," Axakar said simply. "When we first arrived at the council, they called us monsters, primitive, brutes. But we adapted, we learned the rules, played their politics, and we remembered what it meant to bleed. These humans, they never forgot." Virex studied the envoy's expression, trying to understand what he was really saying. "You believe they're dangerous?" "I believe," Axakar growled. "They are what we once were, before we were domesticated." A heavy silence followed. Then, quietly, Virex asked, "Would you go to war with them?" Axakar's laugh was low, guttural, and utterly without joy. "I would rather go to war with them." The room dimmed as a new hologram blinked to life. An image, grainy, flickering, showed a humanoid spacecraft drifting near an uncharted star system. The markings were unmistakable, English letters stenciled on the hull in blocky typeface. USV Aegis. The ship had been spotted near the Velkine Drift, a region so far from the galactic core that even the Republic's cartographers labeled it probationary. A single transmission had been picked up before the signal vanished in static. To those unfamiliar with Terran culture, the message seemed meaningless. But to Virex, who had spent weeks decoding the languages and subcultures referenced in the black box, the words felt like a knife pressed gently to the throat. Survey mission complete. Conditions marginal. Atmosphere breathable. Hostile fauna manageable. Recommend limited colonization potential. Permission to deploy ground team. There was no request for permission from the Republic. No attempt at first contact. No flag waving. Just analysis, calculation, action. "They're expanding," Virex murmured. Axakar nodded grimly. "And not asking for permission." The briefing ended in a flurry of quiet orders and clipped diplomatic exchanges, but Virex stayed behind, staring at the last frame of the broadcast. The human ship was old, battered, clearly not a flagship. If this was their exploratory class, small, unguarded, alone in deep space, what did their warships look like? That night, he sat alone in his quarters, letting the audio logs from the pod play through his private terminal. Not just the footage this time, but voices, raw, unfiltered human speech. A woman laughing during a storm, a man screaming through battlefield fire, children arguing over what game to play, snatches of song, of grief, of hope. He listened for hours. No other species in the Republic recorded their pain so willingly. No other race kept archives of suffering and called them history. The humans did not forget their scars. They built temples to them. He found one recording labeled simply, "For Future Survivors." The voice was deep, male, worn like gravel under boots. It spoke in English, but the translation filters carried its weight perfectly. "We are not gods. We are not monsters. We are not your salvation nor your damnation. We are human. We endure. We adapt. We overcome. Not because it's easy, but because there is no other choice." Virex shut off the terminal and sat in darkness. They were coming, and they would not kneel. The transport bay of the Altari exploration vessel Eos Prime hummed with latent energy, the deck vibrating beneath the feet of its crew as they made final preparations. Virex stood at the loading ramp, his posture rigid, fingers clenching the edge of his belt as the atmosphere grew heavier by the minute. The authorization had come faster than anyone expected. Direct contact, official, deliberate, and sanctioned by the High Council itself. The mission was to investigate the Terran colony that had broadcast the signal from the Velkin Drift. No weapons, no threats. Observe and report. But every instinct in his warrior-born blood told him this was no diplomatic assignment. Beside him, the Var envoy Axikar flexed his claws absently, already in full armor, the deep scar under his left eye twitching every few seconds in anticipation. He'd volunteered the moment the mission was proposed, citing ancestral curiosity, a term Virex suspected was VR code for itching for trouble. Axikar hadn't spoken much since boarding, but now, as the ship powered up its drives, he turned with a growl that bordered on excitement. "If they are what we think they are, we will not find a peaceful village singing to the stars," Axikar rumbled. "We will find fire, stone, and will." Virex didn't answer. Instead, he reviewed the latest planetary scans. The human colony was small, just under 5,000 life forms based on energy signatures and bioscans, no orbital defenses, no atmosphere shields, nothing outwardly threatening. Yet the colony layout was baffling. Instead of building in clusters for efficiency or proximity to resources, they had settled along jagged cliffs, on frostbitten plains, even inside a volcanic basin. It was as if discomfort was a feature, not a bug, as if they needed it. The descent through atmosphere was rough. The winds over Velcan 4 cut against the hull with the force of a sandblaster, and lightning danced between high-altitude storm layers like an angry warning. Virex braced himself as the vessel landed, touching down in a clearing of jagged stone near what appeared to be a half-built human outpost. Already, he could see signs of habitation. Solar panels warped from exposure, stacked crates bearing old military labels, and what looked like a hand-painted sign driven into the dirt near the main structure. The letters were crude but unmistakable. Caution, wildlife bites, humans bite harder. Axikar made a sound halfway between a snort and a laugh. "I like their style." Virex approached the perimeter slowly, flanked by a small diplomatic security team. There were no guards visible, but he could feel the eyes, hidden, watching. Behind tinted windows, behind scopes, behind instinct. These were not the eyes of fearful farmers or wide-eyed explorers. These were the eyes of veterans. From the main structure, a door slid open with a rusty groan, and a human stepped out. Medium height, mid-30s by visual estimation, sun-scorched skin and sharp eyes that scanned them like a predator cataloging prey. No weapon visible, but the way he moved said everything. He didn't walk. He measured. "You're early," he said, the translator implant relaying his words perfectly. Virex stepped forward. "I am Commander Virex of the Altari Republic. This is Envoy Axikar of the Var Dominion. We're here on behalf of the Galactic Council to initiate first formal contact." The man tilted his head slightly. "Nice titles. I'm Sergeant Marcus Lane. Retired. Sort of. Don't worry, you're not the first off-worlders we've seen. Just the first to land with a flag and a purpose." "Then you knew we were coming?" Virex asked, eyebrows raised. Lane shrugged. We figured someone would show up eventually. You don't broadcast in open space unless you're ready to be found. This outpost's more of a test than a settlement anyway. A test? Axikar asked, stepping forward. Of ourselves, Lane said simply, and of who's watching. He turned and gestured them inside. The building's interior was Spartan, functional, patched together with parts from at least 3 different human nations, maybe more. Walls lined with maps, not of the planet, but of regions labeled Desert Patrol, Arctic Cycle, Redwater Raids. Battles, not boundaries, and everywhere. Books, physical books, hundreds of them. Tactical theory, engineering manuals, even poetry. Lane caught Virex's stare. We remember through paper, he said. Digital gets erased too easily. War taught us that. They sat around a table that bore the scars of past meals, past fights, maybe both. Lane poured them dark liquid from a steel thermos. Coffee, he offered. It'll burn, but it's worth it. Virex declined. Axikar drank it without flinching. So, Lane said, leaning back, you want to know what we are. We want to understand, Virex replied. Your history, your evolution, your relationship with violence. Lane gave a short laugh. Not mocking, not proud, just tired. You ever hear the phrase, there's always a bigger fish? Well, we didn't. We were the biggest, and we acted like it. We burned each other for faith, for oil, for flags. Then we rebuilt. Then we burned again, and every time we got smarter, sharper, meaner. He stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the storm-swept landscape. Earth taught us that nature doesn't care. The universe doesn't care. You either adapt or you get buried, and after thousands of years, we adapted hard. Why the isolation? Axikar asked. You had space travel. You could have joined the Republic centuries ago. Because we were still trying to survive ourselves, Lane answered. We didn't want to bring our demons into the stars until we were sure they were on a leash. And are they? Virex asked. Lane turned to face him. His eyes held no malice, no arrogance, just a truth so deeply ingrained it felt etched in bone. Some days, other days, we build colonies on volcanic cliffs to remind ourselves what pain feels like. Not because we enjoy it, because we respect it. There was silence again, and then, outside the compound, a distant roar cut through the wind, deep guttural, followed by the distant staccato of gunfire. Lane didn't flinch. He reached for his rifle with the ease of breathing. Well, he said, checking the scope, looks like your first taste of Earth's legacy just arrived. You coming? Virex exchanged a glance with Axikar. The Var's claws flexed eagerly. The Altari commander stood. We are. The rain came sideways, tearing across the ridge like shrapnel, and the wind howled with the fury of something feral and unchained. Virex could barely see 10 meters ahead through the storm, his visor flickering as environmental sensors struggled to keep up. The landscape around him was chaos, twisted rock formations, cliffs crumbling under their own weight, and mud that sucked at his boots like it wanted to claim him for the planet itself. But through it all, one figure moved with eerie calm. Marcus Lane ducked low beneath a jagged overhang, rifle raised, eyes scanning the dark like a man born to it. There was no fear in him, just a focused kind of alertness, a readiness sharpened by years of surviving places not meant for life. Virex followed, his armored frame clinking softly, while Axikar stomped along behind them like a war beast, barely holding himself back from charging into the storm just to taste the chaos firsthand. Ahead, the gunfire came again. Sharp, controlled, not panicked. Human voices barked orders in clipped, overlapping phrases that even the translator implant had trouble parsing. It wasn't language so much as rhythm. Muscle memory turned vocal. The kind of code only soldiers understand when the line between life and death is thinner than breath. They reached a small ravine where the outpost's forward scouts had set up a defense perimeter. 4 humans crouched behind rock cover, wearing mismatched armor, scuffed and burned from old conflicts. One of them was already dragging a wounded comrade back toward the cliffs, while the others kept their rifles trained on a tree line that shouldn't have been there. It had grown overnight, dense and twisted with foliage that shimmered unnaturally. What the hell is it this time? Lane asked as he dropped into cover beside them. Came out of the fog, boss, one scout replied, gesturing toward the trees. Fast, not natural. No heat signatures. Something's jamming our scans. Eyes only then, Lane muttered, adjusting the dial on his scope. Old school rules. Virex crouched beside him. You don't have orbital surveillance? Lane smirked. We do. Doesn't work here. This place screws with tech like it was built to. You think we picked this planet for comfort? Axikar growled. I like it already. Something moved in the trees. Fast. Too fast. A flash of chitin, claws, and impossible angles. Then it was gone again. The scouts tensed. Lane's knuckles whitened on his grip. We call them ghosts, he said, not because they're dead, because they make us feel like we are. A shadow leapt from the foliage, long and low, a blur of bone and sinew. Before Virex could react, Lane had already fired twice. The creature hit the ground in midair, skidding across the mud, its throat torn open. The other scouts adjusted formation without a word. Confirmation? Lane asked. Not alone. One answered. Saw at least 5 others before it jumped. They always test first, Lane muttered. One body. See if we panic. They think, Virex said quietly, like predators. Lane gave him a sidelong glance. They do, and they learn. They didn't go for our weak side this time. They went for the center, means they've been watching. From the ridge, a guttural screech split the air, answered by more from behind and above. Virex's blood chilled. The sound wasn't just meant to terrify. It was tactical. A misdirection. And then they came. Not in a wave, but in a coordinated pattern, flanking, bounding over rocks, climbing low along the ridge like nightmares uncoiling from the dark. Gunfire erupted, controlled, short bursts. Muzzle flashes lit the storm. Lane moved like an extension of the chaos itself, switching positions mid-reload, barking orders even as he fired. The scouts were surgical, brutal, every movement stripped of waste. These weren't just colonists, these were survivors of 1,000 kinds of hell, and they had brought that experience to the stars like a weapon. Beside Virex, Axikar howled with joy and tore into the fray, a blade crackling to life from his gauntlet. He was a whirlwind of crimson scale and fury, teeth flashing like metal like had claws finding purchase in alien flesh. Virex moved forward too, his pulse rifle humming in his hands, firing into the things that came at them with shrieking mouths and too many limbs. Time distorted. The fight was a blur. One moment, they were holding the line. The next, the last ghost dropped to the mud, twitching and hissing as its blood steamed in the cold rain. The air hung heavy with ozone and something older, something primal. The silence after was deafening. Lane wiped his face with the back of his hand, blood and rain mixing freely. 16 confirmed kills, he said, 1 wounded, no fatalities. Axikar grinned, blood dripping from his blade. A proper welcome. Virex breathed heavily, staring at the steaming corpses of the enemy. You knew this would happen. Out here? Lane said. Yeah, eventually. It always does. That's the point. It's what we're training for. Training? Virex asked. For what? Lane met his gaze directly. For worse. Always train for worse. The words settled in Virex's mind like coals dropped into water, smoking, burning, refusing to vanish. He looked around at the humans who were already securing the area, tending to the wounded, collecting spent rounds, resetting defenses. No one complained. No one asked why. It was just another Tuesday. Back at the compound, the fire crackled as steam rose off armor and skin. Lane handed Virex a metal flask. It burned going down. The taste was harsh, but oddly grounding. You think we're monsters, Lane said quietly. You wouldn't be wrong. Not completely, but we didn't make ourselves this way for fun. Earth made us this way. History made us this way. And now, the galaxy might need us this way. Virex didn't answer immediately. The warmth from the drink warred with the cold realization forming in his gut. If the Republic had found this place first, Virex said, they would have tried to tame it, terraform it, make it soft. And failed, Lane replied. Soft things don't survive here. Virex stared into the fire, images of the dead creatures still fresh in his mind. They'd fought beasts before, pirates, wild fauna, rogue AI, but none of them made him feel like this. It wasn't the enemies outside that haunted him now. It was the humans sitting calmly beside him, drinking, cleaning weapons, and preparing to do it all again tomorrow. The sky above Velkin 4th was changing. Virex stood alone on the edge of a wind-scoured plateau, staring into the horizon where the sun bled orange through roiling thunderclouds. The air carried the scent of ozone and ash, the kind of sharp, metallic bite that always preceded something catastrophic. Lightning arced silently in the distance, clawing across the sky like the planet itself was trying to scream. Behind him, the outpost was alive with motion. Repairs were being made to the perimeter towers, fortifications reinforced. And somewhere near the comm station, Marcus Lane was dry, tired, genuine, while explaining to a VAR engineer why the walls didn't need to look good, just stop teeth. Virex hadn't spoken much since the battle. He had seen death. As a soldier, he'd worn it like a second skin. But this was different. This wasn't just survival, it was choice. The humans hadn't stayed here because they were desperate. They stayed because they wanted to, because there was something in the struggle that defined them, and that terrified him in a way no weapon ever could. "You're not the first to be rattled," Lane said from behind him, footsteps crunching softly over gravel. "You're just the first to admit it without speaking." Virex didn't turn. "This planet is a crucible," Lane nodded, stepping beside him, arms crossed, "and we are the flame." For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind howled between them, a chorus of a world that never stopped fighting. Lane finally broke the silence. "We've colonized 37 planets since breaching faster-than-light travel. All habitable, all controlled, all safe. This one, it's different. It fights back." "Then why not abandon it?" Virex asked. "Why stay?" "Because it reminds us of home," Lane said. "Not because it looks like Earth, but because it hurts like Earth, and we trust pain more than we trust peace." Virex turned slowly, studying the human's face. There were no masks, no diplomatic veneers, just exhaustion layered over clarity, like a man who had walked through fire and come out the other side with the scars to prove it. "And what does the Council not understand about that?" Lane smiled without warmth. "They think peace is natural, that it's the destination. But for us, peace is a pause, a fragile interlude between catastrophes. We didn't climb out of the mud by avoiding conflict. We climbed by enduring it." Down below, Oxacar was running drills with 2 human recruits. Despite the size difference, the humans held their own. Fast, efficient, unpredictable. They learned as they fought, adjusting mid-strike, making mistakes only once. Oxacar, to his credit, was clearly enjoying himself. Virex watched the exchange, unsure if it was a training session or a ritual of mutual respect. "I used to believe," Virex said quietly, "that the Altari were evolution's finest answer to adversity. We mastered logic, created beauty in the face of entropy, turned war into history." "And what did it cost you?" Lane asked. "Certainty," Virex replied. "We forgot how to bleed." Lane didn't respond right away. Instead, he picked up a rock from the ground, rough and pitted with veins of black crystal, and turned it in his hand. "My grandfather fought in the last global war on Earth. Said something to me when I was young, back when I thought soldiers were just people who didn't make it as thinkers. He said, 'You can solve a lot with words, but the ones who carry swords shape the silence that comes after.'" Virex let that sink in. The words didn't glorify violence, they didn't justify it, but they recognized it as something elemental, unavoidable, present, whether invited or not. Suddenly, an alert tone echoed through the comms. Short, urgent. Lane tapped his earpiece and listened, his expression darkening. "What is it?" Virex asked. Lane's jaw tensed. "Unregistered energy signature, low orbit, not one of ours." "Republic?" "No," Lane said. "It's broadcasting a synthetic signal. No origin, no identification, and it's moving." Virex felt the shift in his gut, the kind that only comes when your instincts scream before your brain catches up. "Pirates?" "Worse," Lane said. "Raiders." Within minutes, the outpost was in motion. Shields were brought online, though they wouldn't hold against a full orbital barrage. Civilians were moved into underground bunkers. Automated turrets emerged from hidden platforms. Lane moved through it all like clockwork, issuing orders with precision that came from decades of experience. Virex followed, noting the grim efficiency, no wasted movements, no panic. "These people," Virex began, "have been waiting for this day since we landed," Lane finished. "That's what training means. Expecting the worst, again, and again, and again." Outside, the sky darkened as the Raider craft entered the upper atmosphere. Sleek, black, sharp-edged like a blade given engines. No markings, no flags, just hunger. The first shot came without warning, a kinetic strike that ripped into the ridge above the compound, sending rock and fire raining down. Alarms howled. The ground shook. Lane didn't flinch. "All units," his voice barked through the comms. "Phase 2. Don't break formation. Let them land." "They're not expecting resistance," Virex said. Lane's smile was sharp. "Good." Within minutes, black shapes dropped from the sky, armored figures wielding plasma blades and pulse cannons, expecting to cull sheep. Instead, they met wolves. The humans moved like lightning, firing from behind cover, flanking, using terrain like a second weapon. Axakar led the countercharge, his laughter booming as he tore through invaders like a living siege. Virex found himself fighting beside Lane, back to back, defending the core reactor as the raiders pressed in. Every breath was smoke. Every second a calculation, and for the first time since his youth, Virex felt alive. When the last raider fell, the compound was battered, but standing. Fires burned, blood stained the walls. But the humans didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just began repairs. Lane wiped a smear of ash from his face and looked around. "This was a message," he said. Virex nodded grimly. "They know you're here now." Lane stared into the sky. "Good. Maybe now the galaxy will finally understand what we are." "And what are you?" Virex asked softly. Lane met his gaze, unblinking. "The last species you want to forget." The sky hadn't yet cleared when the council ship arrived. Virex stood atop the command tower, still bruised and blood-crusted from the night before, watching as the sleek, gold-tinted cruiser descended from the stratosphere like some divine relic returning to reclaim order. It shimmered in the pale light, edges too smooth to belong to anything made for war. That was the council's way. Diplomacy over defense, beauty over function. Even now, with the stench of raider corpses still clinging to the outpost walls, they arrived not with soldiers, but with robes and rhetoric. They had come to investigate the incident, of course, to assess the risk, gather data, deliver sterile condolences for the losses they hadn't seen and wouldn't understand. Virex had sent the report himself, but they hadn't come just for protocol. He could feel it. There was fear behind their arrival, thinly veiled behind layers of polished decorum. The hatch opened, and out stepped Delegate Sorrel of the Arisen Concord, her face serene, her steps practiced. She walked across the landing pad like it didn't reek of blood and gunpowder. Behind her trailed 3 more, one from the Sylvanate Collective, one from the Joth Combine, and another Virex didn't recognize. All of them moved like tourists walking through a disaster museum, and none of them seemed to notice the human scouts watching them from the ridgeline, rifles slung casually over their shoulders, eyes like stone. Lane didn't meet them at the pad. He waited at the base of the tower, seated on an overturned crate, sharpening a blade with the kind of patience that made people nervous. He didn't stand when they approached. He didn't offer a bow or a greeting. He just looked up at the counselors with the quiet intensity of a man who'd bled for something they didn't believe existed. Sorrel cleared her throat delicately. "Commander Marcus Lane, I presume?" "Sergeant," he corrected, not looking up. "I'm not a diplomat. You want tea and talk, that's Virex's department." Sorrel smiled thinly. "We came for answers, not pleasantries." "Then you'll be disappointed either way," Lane said, finally rising. "You think what happened here is unusual. It's not. It's just the first time the galaxy watched it happen to someone with a face like ours." One of the delegates, the Joth, bristled. "We did not come to be lectured." "No," Lane said. "You came to make sure we're still on a leash." The silence that followed was not shocked. It was offended. They hadn't expected hostility. They'd expected awe, perhaps confusion. Not this calm, unblinking defiance. Virex stepped forward from the shadows of the tower, his voice cool but firm. They defended this outpost with no warning, no reinforcements, and no promise of rescue. I've reviewed their tactics, their decision-making, their casualties. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't luck. It was doctrine. Sorrel turned to him, eyes narrowed. "You speak highly of them." "I speak truthfully," Virex replied. "What I witnessed here is not the result of desperation or barbarism. It is the result of preparation. They are what the Republic stopped being centuries ago. Resilient." Another delegate, older, cloaked in blue and bearing the insignia of the Philosopher's Accord, stepped forward. "You glorify conflict. War is a failure of reason." Lane stepped between them before Virex could respond. "You think we chose this? You think any of us want war? My people learned long ago that wanting peace isn't the same as keeping it. We tried pacifism. It ended in mass graves. We tried isolation. It bought us time but not safety. Now we train, we fight, we endure, not because we love violence, but because we know it never left." "You speak as if you expect the galaxy to attack you," Sorrel said quietly. Lane looked her dead in the eye. "We expect someone to, eventually, and when they do, we won't beg, we won't run. We'll bleed for every inch, and we'll win." The wind stirred dust between them like the planet itself held its breath. Sorrel recovered her composure. "This kind of thinking, it cannot be allowed to spread unchecked. It undermines the unity we've built. Lane shrugged. Then you'd better hope we stay out here. The council departed quickly after that, cordial in voice, frigid in tone. Virex watched their ship vanish into the clouds, wondering if they'd come to witness the threat or to bury it. Later that night, the storm returned. Thicker this time. Red lightning cracked the sky. The compound hunkered down, but no alarms were raised. The humans worked by lantern light, repairing damage from the raid, restocking ammunition, recalibrating turrets. There was no panic, no rest either, just rhythm. Virex sat at the fire pit again, alone until Lane joined him, dragging a folding chair across the stone. I saw the way they looked at you, Virex said. You scared them. I meant to, Lane said. They still think history bends toward peace. That's how empires fall. Virex stared into the fire, remembering a time when he believed the same thing. They're going to try to control this, Lane nodded. They'll fail. And if they don't, Lane smiled, then we remind them. The fire crackled. Outside the walls, the wind howled. Somewhere in the shadows beyond the floodlights, another creature screamed. But inside, the humans sharpened their knives, repaired their armor, and waited. Not for peace, but for purpose. They weren't survivors anymore. They were the storm. The message came at midnight. Virex was in the comms bay, reviewing heat map scans from the perimeter when the terminal blinked twice. An encrypted packet routed through 6 proxy relays tagged with council-level clearance. No sender, no signature. Just a header that read, Directive 04 Vermilion, Containment Protocol Pending. He stared at it for a long time. Then he opened it. The contents were precise, clinical, observation logs, council intelligence intercepts, psychological profiles, battlefield analytics, and then the final page, a decision tree that ended not with negotiation, but with one word burned into the screen like a wound, neutralization. They were afraid. Not of what the humans had done, but of what they might inspire. Virex shut the terminal down and walked outside, the cold night air pressing against him like a warning. The stars above Velkin 4 were sharp and brilliant tonight. No clouds, no storm, only the unflinching light of a billion eyes watching from beyond. Below him, the compound was still lit, quiet in the way a barracks is before deployment. He could hear the clink of gear being checked, metal brushing against metal. Footsteps, voices low but steady. They knew something was coming, and they were ready. Lane was on the eastern wall, looking out over the dark valley beyond the cliffs. He didn't turn as Virex approached. They made their choice, didn't they? Virex didn't ask how he knew. Lane had a way of sensing things, like a predator scenting blood. They're afraid you'll change the balance. Lane nodded slowly. Because they built a galaxy where survival means submission, where peace means forgetting what made you strong in the first place. They don't want another war. No, Lane said. They just want to make sure they're the only ones allowed to win one. The quiet stretched between them. That the moonlight painted the landscape in silver and frost, hiding the scars of the last battle beneath a blanket of illusion. But the scars were still there, just waiting. What happens if they come for you? Virex asked. Lane didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was calm, icy, certain. Then we'll show them that forgetting pain doesn't erase it. It just gives it time to grow teeth. The next day, the council ship returned, this time with an escort. Not a symbol of trust, but of control. 2 Republic cruisers, gleaming and graceful, came out of orbit like the opening chords of a dirge. They didn't request landing clearance. They announced it, loudly, as if to remind everyone that the rules were theirs to enforce. Lane didn't wait for them to reach the surface. He met them in orbit. Using a civilian transport rigged with enough ECM jammers and stealth plating to fool the ship's outer sensors, Lane and a crew of 5 ex-military specialists slipped aboard the flagship during docking procedures. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't a declaration. It was a conversation they intended to force. Virex watched the feed from the outpost command deck. Heart pounding. No alarms triggered. No shots fired. Just Lane stepping into the council chamber aboard the cruiser like a storm in human skin. The feed didn't have audio. It didn't need it. He watched Sorrel rise from her chair, visibly startled, watched other delegates push back from the table. Lane stood alone in the center of the room, unmoving, unarmed, but not harmless. He placed a single object on the table, a bone fragment, curved and jagged, charred at the edge. a remnant of the last creature that tried to take the outpost by force. Then he turned and walked away. No guards stopped him, no ships fired. The message had been delivered. Not a threat, a truth. Back on the surface, the outpost buzzed with uneasy calm. Reinforcements arrived, not to disarm the humans, but to watch them. Scientists, observers, the Republic's version of containment, wrap the problem in red tape until it stops being a threat. Virex sat with Lane that evening by the fire, the crackle of flames the only sound for a while. "You risked everything," Virex said. "What if they had taken you?" Lane took a sip from his canteen, then passed it to him. Then they'd know what a prisoner of Earth feels like. Virex smiled bitterly. "You're making enemies." Lane's expression didn't change. Only the ones who've forgotten what the word enemy means. There was silence again, but it wasn't the silence of fear or dread. It was the silence of understanding, the kind forged between men who've walked the edge of history and seen what lies on both sides. Virex looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his eyes. "They'll come again, in greater numbers, with better reasons, more polished lies." Lane nodded. "Let them. And when the war comes?" Lane turned to him, and for the first time Virex saw it. Not the soldier, not the strategist, but the soul beneath, tired, wounded, but unbreakable. "When the war comes," Lane said, "we won't be the ones who started it, but we'll make damn sure we're the last ones standing." And somewhere, out beyond the blackened sky, the galaxy turned, and humanity waited. The war never came the way they expected. There was no grand invasion, no line of warships stretching across the stars, no noble declaration broadcast across every system. When it began with silence, an absence of messages from border stations, a transport convoy that never arrived, a listening post that went dark without warning. And then came the fire. The first true strike hit the Republic's outer ring, a coordinated assault that tore through 3 systems in a matter of hours. Pirate fleets armed with technology far beyond what they should have possessed. Weapons traced to black market suppliers who had always operated with quiet tolerance, until they no longer needed to hide. It wasn't just a rogue act. It was sanctioned, directed, and worst of all, it was disposable. Sacrificial forces meant only to test the waters, to bait a response, to reveal who among the Council would act and who would cower. But the response did not come from the Republic. It came from Velkan 4th. The first wave never even reached the surface. They were intercepted in atmosphere by human craft running hot and heavy, their hulls scarred, their shielding raw but dense. They fought not with finesse but with fury, looping behind enemy formations, cutting thrusters mid-dive to outmaneuver cleaner, sleeker ships. They didn't follow Republic flight patterns. They flew like wolves chased by fire, every move born from instinct and history and rage remembered too well to fade. On the ground, they did worse. They set traps, not elegant minefields, but brutal ones. Lured enemies into valleys that had no exit, triggered landslides they had engineered over weeks, turned weather into a weapon. The attackers, so used to exploiting weakness, found only thorns. Virex stood at the front lines, beside Lane, watching orbital fire light up the clouds. It should have been terrifying, but it felt righteous. "They thought we were a colony," Lane said. "They didn't realize we were the contagion." The battles spread, not across systems, but through minds. Whispers began in council chambers, murmurs of dissent. Why hadn't the Republic responded? Why had humanity been left to fight alone? And then came the stories of soldiers with broken limbs still charging the line, of engineers converting mining drills into plasma cannons, of medics dragging wounded through ice storms to patch them up with nothing but duct tape and stubbornness, of men and women and children holding ground not for glory, not for conquest, but because it was theirs. Even VAR warriors began requesting deployment rotations to Velkan, not as conquerors, but as students. Virex watched it all unfold, watched a planet no one cared about become a legend, watched a people the galaxy had dismissed become its sharpest blade. It was not clean, it was not perfect, but it was real. In the months that followed, the Council changed, slowly, grudgingly, but it changed. Borders redrawn, treaties rewritten, and every negotiation, every conference, every vote was now colored by a single truth no one could unsee. Humanity had arrived. They hadn't asked for permission. They hadn't begged for a seat. They had earned it. The last time Virex visited Velkan 4, the outpost was no longer just a perimeter. It was a city, rough-hewn and strange, half built with salvaged materials and half with purpose, scarred with battle and yet unmistakably alive. Children ran through the mud laughing, their games echoing off walls built to hold out monsters. Above them flew no flag, no banner, just a crude sign, painted by hand, the same words he'd seen when he first arrived: "Wildlife bites, humans bite harder." He found Lane in the old mess hall, still worn, still scratched, still smelling like engine grease and campfire. "You leaving again?" Lane asked without looking up. Virex nodded. "The council wants me back. There's talk of restructuring, war commissions, defensive coalitions. They want guidance." Lane grinned. "And you're going to tell them how not to get their asses kicked by people who know how to bleed." Something like that. They sat together for a while, saying nothing. Then Virex turned to him. "You ever going to leave this place?" Lane shook his head. "This is where we remember, where we train, where we learn how not to become what we fight." "And if peace really does come?" Lane looked out at the valley, now lined with defense towers and farmland, with homes grown from steel and stubborn hope. "Then we stay ready anyway." As Virex stood to leave, Lane called after him. "Hey, when you talk to them, when they ask what we are." Virex paused. Lane smiled. "Tell them we're not heroes, not villains, just the next thing coming. And if they're smart, they'll keep up." Virex walked out into the light, the wind whipping around him like memory. He looked up at the sky, at the stars beyond, and for the first time in years, he believed the galaxy might just survive what was coming. Because now it had humans in it. And humans didn't run from the fire. They were born in it. Thank you for joining us on this unforgettable journey across the stars. If this story gripped your heart or sparked your imagination, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. We read every one. Your support means the world, and it helps us bring more powerful sci-fi stories to life. Until next time, stay strong, stay curious, and never underestimate humanity.